we've all been to these, banquets that honors somebody or galas, and they go on and on and on, and there's one speaker after another. But a story told of one of these, and this went on indefinitely. And finally, a guy went up to speak, but a lot of people had left, and there was only one person left in the audience. So he said, "Sir, how come you're still here?" He said, "I'm the next speaker." Okay. So I want to thank you all for persevering with this. Okay. Some of you may be the next speaker. Our topic for this afternoon is Sabbath as solitude and reconciliation. And by means of almost like a gathering hymn or a centering piece, what I want to do is I want to read those 10 commandments that I gave you that I didn't read this morning in terms of some practical hints to keep Sabbath in our life, just to highlight them. Number 1, practice Sabbath with the discipline demanded of a commandment. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. That's not a lifestyle suggestion. The discipline of a commandment, even as you practice the discipline of life and duty. See, life also brings many, many kinds of disciplines. Your mother's sick, you have to visit her. You have young kids, you have the job to do, a mortgage to pay, all those things. That is also that's the discipline of life. And that kind of is conscriptive. You have to do that. Sabbath can fall off the conveyor belt because we don't have to do that. And we can forget that this is the discipline of a commandment. Secondly, have at least one Sabbath moment every day. Give yourself something to look forward to every day. Have a Sabbath moment, even if it's 2 minutes, it's 5 minutes, it's a Sabbath walk, it's a Sabbath glass of scotch, it's a Sabbath phone call. But give yourself something every day. I'll look forward to that moment. Thirdly, go somewhere every day where you can't be reached, even if it's just for 10 minutes, even if it's just for half an hour, but someplace where this is your place. Nobody can find you there. Remember Jesus said that he'd go off regularly to somewhere where they couldn't find him. Remember one time he said, "We were hunting for you all night. Where were you?" He was going someplace where he couldn't be reached. Fourth, honor the wisdom of dormancy. Do something regularly that's non-pragmatic. I'll talk about that when we talk about solitude this hour. Certain non-pragmatic things where you do something simply that has no utility to it. You go, you sit in a chair. You write a poem you're never going to publish. You knit a sweater you're going to throw away because it's awful when you're finished. But there's no practical reason to what you're doing. Fifth, pray and meditate in some way. Notice I didn't say every day, regularly, but pray and meditate regularly in some way. Sixth, be attentive to little children, old people, family, food, wine, and the weather. Because usually those things aren't very pragmatic. See, notice the list there. Little kids, because they're not on the wheel of life yet. Old people, because they've been kicked off the wheel of life. Family, food, wine, and the weather. 7, live by this axiom. I saw this once. I was saying Mass in a church in Arizona, and in the sacristy where the priest vests up, there was a little card and had this on. And I immediately copied it down, and I like it. It says, "If not now, when? If not here, where? If not with these people, with whom? If not for God, why?" When we talked about our delay to come to the wedding banquet, well, it's not the right time. If it isn't the right time now, when is it? Or these aren't the right people. If these aren't the right people, who will be the right people? Well, this isn't the right place. If this isn't the right place, when will be the right place? See, that helps get us into the present moment. 8th, stay in touch with and listen to your body. Your body will tell you lots of things in terms of you're tired, shut it down, or whatever, but listen to your body. 9th, drink a glass or 2 of red wine on most evenings. And I've added, ideally, in a rocking chair. Okay. And number 10, don't nurse grudges and obsessions. They'll kill you. Grudges and obsessions will simply break your heart at a certain point. The statute of limitations has to run out. Now, the Sabbath is solitude and as reconciliation. I'm going to begin by talking about solitude. What is solitude? Like we hear this word, and it's a word we deeply long for. It's something we deeply long for. And the busier we are, in some variation of that. We long for vacation. You long to get off the wheel. You long to slow down the rat race, or if you have the right words, say, I'm longing for solitude. I'm busy. I'm overworked. I'm overtired. What I could do, there's too much stuff in my life. I'd love to have some solitude. So we long for solitude, but we rarely get there. And I say this sympathetically. I'm not going to say we rarely get there because we're not that bright or whatever. No. Solitude is a very, very elusive thing. It's a wonderful and important thing, but solitude is a very elusive thing. It's not easy at all, at all, at all. So I'll try to give you some examples this afternoon and so on. And the first reason is, solitude, as we're going to see, is simply really to be in the present moment. We're going to reflect on what does it mean to be in the present moment. But that's often not the way we understand solitude. We have false ideas of solitude. I'll tell you a personal story. Because oftentimes I think we unconsciously or consciously think of solitude as just another item we can consume in this sense. And I'll use myself as a bad example of this. Some years ago, when I was still teaching in Edmonton, I was going to spend the summer in a Trappist monastery. And I was going to leave at the end of May. Classes ended towards the end of April, exams, then commencement and so on. And so by the end of May, all your papers are corrected and so on. And then I'm going to get to spend 3 months in a Trappist monastery. And ideally, I wanted to write a book. In fact, that's when I wrote The Restless Heart. And I was looking forward to this because I was living a pretty hectic life. I was in formation. I was a full-time teacher. I was in administration, and you're trying to have family and friends, and you're pulled in many different directions. And I was looking so forward to this. I'm going to have 3 months of solitude. And I had been to this monastery before. It's the Trappist monastery just out of Portland, Lafayette, Oregon. Wonderful people, wonderful place, and so on. And I had been fantasizing about all the wonderful solitude I was going to have between writing. But there's a little lake, and I had to fantasize. I want to walk around the lake, and then they have outdoor rocking chairs by this lake. I was going to sit in one of those rocking chairs and smoke my pipe. Smoke a pipe. I normally don't smoke a pipe, but I bought one. They're going to be in this monastery. Just this idea, what a wonderful fantasy. You're sitting by a lake, smoking a pipe. The birds are singing. They have a little fireplace in the guest house. I light the fireplace. You sit in a rocking chair there, do some reading. And then they have a beautiful chapel they've built in the woods, a meditation chapel where they sit. And the front is like a glass bubble, and you're sitting in this complete silence, and you're looking out into the woods, and it's going to sit and pray with them, and so on. So I want to have this wonderful summer of solitude. Well, I get there late on a Thursday night, on an airplane and a bus trip and this, and you're a little tired and you're worn out and so on. And I got there probably, 5 o'clock or something. By 10 o'clock that night, I had done all those things. I had used up all my solitude for the summer, I got there, unpacked, walked around the lake, sat by the house, smoked my pipe, went in, lit the fireplace, had a meditation with the nun and so on. And now it's about 11 o'clock at night, and I'm climbing up. I'm going to be here for 3 months. I'm going to go nuts in this place. I've done all this solitude stuff. No phones, no television, no sports scores, no connection to friends, And then I realized this is like an addict drying out. It took me some weeks to get comfortable. In fact, by the time I got really comfortable, it was time to leave. By the time your system lets down, the agitation, and because we're used to all this work and all this activity and all this stimulation and so on. And I had looked so forward to this solitude, these 5 or 6 things I had fantasized, but I mowed them all down within the first 5 hours. I had done all this, and almost like a consumer item. Okay, now I've smoked my pipe by the lake. Now I've sat by the fireplace. Now I've done this. Now I've taken a walk around the lake. Now I've sat with them in meditation. And now what? See, that's not solitude. Those were nice things to do, but they're not solitude. So what is solitude? Well, I want to begin by giving you, first of all, 4 things that it isn't that we commonly think it is, okay? First of all, it's not an altered state of consciousness. See, we have ordinary consciousness. Right now, you're in ordinary mode. If you were a computer, they'd have a little thing in the corner, ordinary mode, safe mode, okay? Your windows are opened up right now in kind of ordinary, safe mode. Now, solitude or mysticism and so on, those aren't something different. I don't know where we got this idea from, that mystical states and solitude, that it's some extraordinary, you levitate or something. No. Solitude, it's not an altered state of consciousness at all. And if it's altered, you're probably not in solitude, okay? Secondly, it's not a false consciousness. I say like taking a shower. Sometimes we fantasize, when we go to pray or something, we think that it's, unconsciously it's like, when you take a shower, you know what you're doing. You go in there, you stand out, and you turn the knob down, and there's water comes over you, and you get yourself washed and so on. So that's unconscious. We go into the chapel, and we want to unconsciously turn on some valves. Solitude starts washing over you, and something's happening to you. Well, something's supposed to happen from the outside, like a shower, like water coming over you, and now I'm getting washed clean of all my distractions and all this type of stuff. Solitude doesn't work like that. And also, it's not a blank consciousness. When you go to pray, this is real tricky. You go to pray, what should you think about? Well, sometimes we say, well, I'm not going to think about normal things, and you try to make your consciousness like a blank sheet of paper. You're going to get a headache from that real quick, because your consciousness, as one of my philosophy professors used to say, is like a barrel of monkeys. When you push one down, 6 more come out. So every time you push the thought away, 3 more thoughts come out. You can't blank your consciousness. You'll get a headache if you say, well, I'm not going to think about anything. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to think about anything. Then I'm going to be in solitude. Well, I wish you luck, because you'll think about something, because your mind just thinks. That's what it does. That's what minds are for. They're running all the time. And you have to be thinking about something. So it's not a blank consciousness. And also, ultimately, that's where it's different than meditative prayer. But solitude, in its best and widest definition, isn't even a concentration on something lofty or holy. So if you go to chapel, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes when we talk about meditative prayer, as opposed to contemplative prayer. In meditation, that's what you do. When you go to do meditation prayer, you make a distinction between holy thoughts and concentration thoughts and distractions. You know what I mean by distractions. So you go to chapel and you read the readings for today, and a few thoughts come to you about Jesus and anxiety. You think about that, and all of a sudden you're doing tomorrow's menu. You say, no, that's a distraction. And you come back to the text, and after a while, all of a sudden you're thinking about some relationship, and you come back to the text. See, you separate between holy thoughts, lofty thoughts, prayerful thoughts, and distraction thoughts. And so when I'm concentrating, I'm in solitude. When I'm distracted, I'm not in solitude. No. When I'm concentrating, I'm in meditative prayer. When I'm distracted, I'm not in meditative prayer. I'm in meditative prayer that's being distracted. Okay, that's not solitude. What is solitude? Story in a text. Thomas Merton, great spiritual writer, great spiritual figure during the last half of the last century. Merton was a very, very restless young man. Bright, artistic temperament, a writer, an artist, just a lot of eros inside of this man. And so, of course, very soon he had lots of problems. So by the time in his mid-20s, he's living in New York. He can't sleep at night. He goes to jazz clubs all night. He's smoking. In those days, they smoked tobacco, fortunately. Okay, but he smoked all night. And he drank and listened to jazz music because he couldn't sleep and he couldn't eat properly, and he had ulcers and had holes in his stomach, and after a while couldn't hold down a job because he was too restless to do that. And he eventually went to a monastery simply to save his life. I mean, sincerely, too, to find God. And somebody realized, if I don't go there, I'm going to die. So he goes to a monastery, and initially he had what he himself called and mystics call some time, a season of great fervor. They call first fervor. It's like, when couples first fall in love, you get this season of the honeymoon. It's wonderful. It's fervors. But then he found out this restlessness, you can't turn it off like a valve. This follows you. And it follows you into the monastery. While he was in that season of fervor, that's when he wrote that wonderful book, 7-Story Mountain. But that was written on a high. That was written on his charismatic honeymoon high, But then all this restlessness and the artistic temperament, all of his stuff came back. But now he was more mature, and he knew how to handle this stuff. But then in fact, the last 3 years before he died, he was doing a certain experiment in solitude. And he went to live as a Trappist, but they had a hermitage off their property. So he went and he lived in this hermitage by himself. So he was a Trappist and going even deeper into the woods, so to speak, in terms of just to be silent, to live by myself, to pray, to see where this leads me. And during those 3 years, he kept diaries. And in fact, those diaries they're wonderful to read because he's completely transparent. During those 3 years, he also fell in love with a nurse, and he had to work through this obsession that he fell in love with this nurse. But he's doing deep prayer, and he is writing about solitude, what it means, how can I attain it. Incidentally, a very fine book on that was written by John Howard Griffin. And you'll recognize that name. Remember, he was the white author who took this pigmentation in his skin and wrote the book Black Like Me. And eventually that gave him cancer. He eventually died from that. But he was a great friend of Merton. And after Merton died, the Trappists hired Griffin to write the definitive biography on Merton. But Griffin was in a depression at the time because his wife had just died. So he went and he lived in Merton's cabin for 3 years and never wrote a word. And then the Trappists sacked him and fired him. But then later on, he published his own book, which is a little book, a thin little book, but a wonderful little book, genius. And it's called Follow the Ecstasy. And he just takes the major clips from Merton's diary during those 3 years. And I want to read you one of those clips as my own definition of solitude. Because it is enough to be in an ordinary human mode with one's hunger, one's sleep, one's cold and warmth, rising and going to bed, putting on blankets and taking them off, making coffee, then drinking it, defrosting the refrigerator, reading, meditating, working, praying. I live as my ancestors lived on this earth until eventually I die. Amen. There is no need to make an assertion about my life, especially so about it as mine, though doubtless it is not somebody else's. I must learn to live so as to forget program and artifice. Notice what Merton's saying. He says, I'm in solitude. Why? Notice this isn't blank consciousness. This isn't altered state of consciousness. Today I'm in solitude. Why? Because what's in front of me, I'm tasting, I'm feeling, I'm present. He says, my own hunger, my own sleep, my own cold, my own warmth, rising, going to bed, putting on blankets, taking them off, making coffee, drinking it, defrosting the refrigerator. He said, these are timeless acts. See, we do all these things every day, but we're not in them. We get up and our alarm clock goes off, and we shower and we make our bed and we go to work and we drink a cup of coffee and we drink it en route and so on. We're doing all this stuff, but we're not present to it. See, to be in solitude is to be truly present to your own life. Jim Findlay, who's one of Merton's pupils, when he gives workshops, I've been to one of them, Findlay always asks people this. He says, if he were here, he'd ask, he said, when is the last time you drank water when you were drinking water? When is the last time you drank coffee when you were drinking coffee? When is the last time you ate a hamburger when you're eating a hamburger? I think you get what he means. We do all these things. When's the last time we felt the warmth of our own blankets or the cold and so on? See, these are things that, he said, my ancestors have experienced since eternity. And if we are awake to them, then it's enough. All the things we're searching for, I need to be everywhere and feel everything and experience everything and know everybody. Well, we do, except we're not inside of it. See, these are all timeless things. Eternity is in the moment, but we're not in the moment. See, to be in solitude is not to be any otherwhere than where you are. It's not to be with any other people than whom you're with. It's not to be in any other body than the one you're in. It's not to be in any other state than you're in, but it's to be present to that. See, notice, this is a description of the wedding banquet. He's there. He's there. He's not at a wedding dancing, but he's having imagine how calm and peaceful and much at peace he is when you say, I feel my own body, my own blanket, my own cold. I make coffee, I drink it, I'm there. See, that's solitude. Now, the tricky part is, you don't stay there. Somebody once said, the deep secrets of life and these things, do we ever achieve them? Yes and no. Rumi, the poet I quoted for you last night, who says, I've lived too long where I can be reached. I love another one of his lines. He says, We live with a deep secret that we sometimes know and then not. And then we know it again. See, the next morning probably didn't work like that. The next morning he got up and he was distracted and he had a headache or a heartache or whatever, and he didn't taste his own coffee and he wasn't present to himself and so on. See, it's not like if you ever nail this, you got it. You're in solitude for the rest of your life. No, this is a beautiful, beautiful description of solitude. Okay? And that one day he had it. But he also knows this is the secret. This is the deep secret. It's deep secret we sometimes know and then not. Now, you don't always get this, but when you get it, you know, this is solitude. This is what we're gunning for. You know, and then it doesn't matter where you are, whether you are at a Trappist monastery, with a lake, smoking a pipe in a rocking chair, drinking a glass of wine by the ocean. You know, see, we always fantasize solitude as the beautiful sunset, the glass of wine on the ocean, the pipe by the lake, you know, and those are nice things, you know. But solitude can be anywhere. It can be, you know, getting up in the morning, taking the blanket off your body, and so on. It can be any place. And it's if we're present to it. And we can also, we've all drunk glasses of wine by the ocean, which were quite forgettable because we were so distracted about something else, we weren't really there to begin with. So it's not where you are, what you're doing, it's how we're in where we are and what we're doing. So today, and notice that it's enough to be. I don't need to be anybody else. Today I don't need to be rich, famous. I don't want to be known all over the world. I'm achieving what's timeless. I'm drinking coffee. I'm tasting it. I know the warmth of my own body. I know the coldness of the air. So it's enough to be. I don't have to make an assertion today. See, that's not an altered state of consciousness. It's not a blank state of consciousness. It's not a false state of consciousness. It's not a concentration on something holy. He's in his own skin. He is present. He's face to face with what's in front of him. Which incidentally, according to St. Paul, is the definition of heaven. What's heaven going to be? Heaven's going to be face to face. For now we see us through a glass darkly. For now we see us through an enigma. There's always some kind of veil separating us from what's real. So in heaven, then we'll see face to face. See, there's a little glimpse of heaven. Just you're face to face. That's solitude. And that's really Sabbath. Now, what is it to flush this out? As Merton says, it's an awareness of what's in front of us. But it's also, I want to work on the second bullet a little bit, it's an awareness of what's deepest inside of us, our mystical center. Our deepest center, when we talk about, you know, our mystical center, what is that? Let me begin with an expression. You know when we use an expression like this to say, this rings true, or something rings false? Have you ever wondered about that? Say, well, you know, this rings true, or this rings false. Rings true or false to what? Is there some kind of bell inside of us? Well, in fact, yes. You know, there is something inside of us. When we say, this rings true or this rings false, what is ringing true or false to the bell inside of us is our deep mystical center. And solitude puts us in touch with what's in front of us. But at the same time, it gets us more deeply in touch with what's deepest inside of us. And what is deepest inside of us? It's our mystical center. It is that bell inside of us. Well, what is that? Daniel Berrigan was once being interviewed by an interviewer, and the interviewer said to him, says, Father, where's the deep sense of your faith? Where does it reside? Does it reside in your head or your heart? And Berrigan said, neither. He says, faith isn't where your head is at. He said, and faith isn't where your heart is at. He said, faith is where your ass is at. And he said, I don't mean that cutely. He said, in this sense, that where are you sitting? Where are your commitments? Like you've all had this experience, for instance, sometimes where, you know, your head isn't in something, your heart isn't in it, but you're in it. Why are you sitting where you're sitting? Whether it's inside of a marriage, a vocation, a job, a church, wherever, or sometimes your head is not there, your heart isn't there, but you're there. That means there's some deeper part of you. There's some deeper part of you. That is what Ruth Burroughs, the great British mystic, who I think is one of the great mystical writers today, when she defines mysticism, to my mind, that's the best definition of mysticism I've ever read. And she said, you know what mysticism is? That's being touched inside of yourself by God in a way that's deeper than words, language, imagination, and feeling. Well, how is that possible? You're touched in a way that's deeper than words, that you can imagine, that you can articulate, that you can even feel. Okay, well, Berrigan's just put it. We experience that. Those are when, see, your head tells you what's smart to do, and your heart tells you what you want to do, and another part of you tells you what you have to do. See, that's your deeper intuitive sense, your gut, or whatever you call it. See, it tells you what you have to do. And see, that's your mystical center. And solitude gets you in touch with what's out there, and it also gets you in touch with this ought center. These are the things I have to do. That's the deepest, truest part of you. Now, it's interesting, when scholars and poets and mystics try to nail this down, there's been some wonderful language developed around this. And they say, well, how do you define this center? Okay, Bernard Lonergan, the great philosopher, who was an intellectual. So Lonergan said, you know what that center is? He says, that's the brand of the first principles inside of the human person. Lonergan says, when we're born, truth and beauty and goodness are simply stamped inside of us like a brand. And you can never betray it. You'll always know what's right and what's wrong and what's beautiful and what isn't and what's true and what's false and so on, because it's been branded into you by God. Okay, that's an intellectual speaking. You know what the mystics used to say? They say, it's the kiss of God in the soul before you were born. You know, in fact, some of them expressed it very beautifully. They say, the last thing God does before God puts the soul in the body is God kisses the soul. And then unconsciously during your whole life, you remember that kiss. And then you relate everything in the life according to that unconscious kiss. That's when you first meet love. That's why you know it's love. And you know what false love is? Because you've already experienced true love before you were born. Henry Nouwen used to call that first love. Henry Nouwen says first love is not the first time you fall in love. You've already been loved. That's why you know it is love the first time you fall in love. You remember God's kiss. You remember the brand. You remember the touch. And that creates the bell inside of you. That's your mystical center. And that is oftentimes why it can overrule your head and can overrule your heart. You know, your heart and your head are instruments that somebody else is using. See, there's a deeper part. And that deeper part remembers God's kiss. It knows the first principles. And then it relates everything to that. Now, solitude is also to be in touch with that. Because, you know, when we go through life and we act out, which is, psychologists use that expression, and I like it. Acting out kind of means it's not really you acting, but somebody's acting. And we're doing dumb things. We're acting out. Why? Because we're out of touch with the center. See, we're out of touch with what's truest inside of us, even though when we're acting out, we think it is us. Our family and friends, they know. They say, this isn't you. Why are you doing stuff like that? Wow, this is me. I finally woke up, but now I know what I'm doing, and so on. Everybody in the round, you can see, this isn't you. It's not you at all. Okay? You're acting out. There's energy acting through you, but it's not you. Okay? See, you're out of touch with that center. You're out of solitude. When we're in solitude has these two complementary qualities. One of them, we're drinking our own coffee. We're aware. We're inside the moment. And not just in terms of the materially way that Merton described it. I'm drinking my own coffee. But in the bigger things of our life, I'm in my own marriage. I'm in my own skin. I'm in my own vocation. I'm in my own life. I am in my own family. I'm at table with my family. Remember, because a lot of times we're in a room with people. We're not in the room with people at all. Your kids are at the table. They're there physically. They're not there. And they're looking at their wristwatch. How soon can they get out of here? And they're not there, you know. They're not in solitude, you know. So I mean, that's the first part, the outside, but then also the inside. Are we in touch with this, the kiss of God? Are we in touch with our mystical center? Because when we are, then we're acting truly, because that's our deepest part. That's the part that is most precious to you. That's the part you guard. That's your center for intimacy. That's the place where you get violated when people violate you. They violate your intimacy. That's your deep center. And see, and you come to that in solitude. Solitude is, you're aware of the outside, you're present, but you're also aware of the inside. You're in touch with it. But not always consciously. some aids to solitude. The first one is, don't let restlessness drive you outward into activity, but sit with it until it turns into quiet and into solitude. You know, it's one of the great genius formulations that Henry Nouwen gave us. I think it was only his third book when he wrote the book Reaching Out, and he talks about the three great movements of the spiritual life. And the first one he calls from loneliness to solitude. You could also say from restlessness to solitude. And it was still one of the great formulations he gave us. But that, and that's in Nouwen's writings all over, but he probably was the most explicit spiritual writer, certainly in English, who's written on this. And it's still wonderful. That book was written in 1975. It still hasn't been surpassed or equaled in any way. But now in this section when he talks about how you turn restlessness into solitude, and it's very, very practical. See, restlessness isn't abstract. When we're restless, we're jumping out of our skin. It's Friday night. It's Saturday night. You want to do something. The whole world's doing something exciting except you. And we're sitting home and we're jumping out of our skin and so on. Or there are times we just get really, really hyper and restless. And you see it particularly young kids and young people and so on. Now, what is the great temptation always when we're restless? To go out into activity. I feel restless, I'll call some friends, we'll meet, we'll go to a restaurant, we'll go dancing, we'll do something. Nouwen says that's exactly the wrong movement. Because what we're really doing is we are throwing gasoline onto fire. You know, see, the restlessness wants activity, but the activity precisely feeds the restlessness. And that's why we've all had this experience, and kids have it all the time. It's called being a teenager and being a young person. And that is, you know, we're tired and restless, and we go to a party, and what the party does for us, it in fact makes us more restless and more tired, and we come home, and now we're more tired and restless than before we went to the party. But the next night we do it again. We just can't stop it. See, the restlessness drives us into activities which makes us more restless. Well, there's a clue in that. Nouwen says, what you have to do with restlessness is you have to sit with it. The more you feel compulsed to move outward, the more you feel anxious, the more you feel lonely, the more you feel separated. If I don't move tonight, it's going to kill me. That's the night you shouldn't move. Sit in that chair and just stay there long enough, however long it takes, until you begin to feel calm, quiet, peaceful, non-compulsed, non-obsessed, then you can get up and move. Because if we move out of obsession, out of anxiety, out of restlessness, out of hyper-drivenness, all it's going to do is fan the flames. It's going to take us further from solitude. See, solitude is found by sitting still long enough inside of the restlessness. And it's lost when precisely we take the restlessness and it drives us outward more and more and more and more activities. The activities are really tantamount to throwing gasoline on fire. It's not water we're throwing on the fire, but gasoline. It makes it burn more and more and more intense. See, so that's the first rule. To come to solitude, we have to be disciplined in our restlessness. When I'm restless, when I'm hyper, when I'm driven, that's not a time to move out with that. That's precisely the opposite, the time to sit still. Now, ironically, it's the opposite. You know, when you most feel, I don't want to see anybody, I don't want to be with anybody, that's probably a time you should go out and visit somebody, because, you know, that's your paranoia and everything else, you know. It's a kind of a rule of thumb. I mean, we got to listen to our body and listen to our rhythms and so on. There's tiredness plays in. But in terms of temperament, it's the nights when I got to do something tonight. I can't sit still. That's the very night you got to sit still. And I don't want to go to parties anymore. I don't want to socialize. I don't want to be with people. I just want to be with myself. That's when you most need to be with people. See, we got to work against our own temperament, but particularly with restlessness. See, when we talked earlier today about excessive restlessness, that's what keeps us away precisely from solitude, from Sabbath. Can't go there, I'm just too restless. I can't be really at a meal with this person at a table. I'm too restless tonight. We'll never attain solitude. Secondly, do non-pragmatic things. People who give workshops and this and so on, one of their rules of thumb is always, what we have to do is make sure that regularly in our lives we program in things that are I call them non-pragmatic. They often say non-utilitarian, non-useful. See, we're driven. Notice these things go against narcissism, pragmatism, and restlessness. See, the pragmatism, kind of almost like the air we inhale in our society. What are you doing that's useful, on a given time? Are you learning a language? Are you learning a new computer program? Are you answering emails? Are you gardening? Are you doing something that's useful? And we have to program ourselves to say, every day, regularly, or at least not every day, but regularly, habitually, we have to try to do things that are not useful, that somehow get us, those are Sabbath moments. They get us off the wheel of life. If I'm only pragmatic, and those of us, and I'm one of them, who are workaholics, it is really hard to do something that isn't useful. Because you know what's going to happen? The second you start doing it, you're going to start thinking about what you could be doing that is useful. And it'll always impale itself onto you. So you say, for instance, here this, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take a walk. I'm just going to take a walk. I mean, I'm saying this theoretically. So you go out and you start taking a walk. And then you're walking by the store and think, well, I could pick up that quart of milk, then I wouldn't have to drive back here later tonight. So you stop in and you pick up the quart of milk and then something else. See, at that moment, it's no longer a contemplative walk. It becomes a walk to the grocery store. But see, it'll always happen. You start doing anything, immediately you'll start thinking, or you'll start guilting yourself, I'm sitting here knitting, something that's going to not be all that nice anyway, but I could be writing my aunt who's sick and I should be doing that. And then you put the knitting down, you're going to write your aunt. So you'll always be doing something that has some utilitarian thing to it. It'll always impale itself on you. See, solitude is a discipline. The monks and stuff will teach you this. Solitude is discipline. It's not going to happen. Prayer and stuff is not going to happen without discipline. Do things regularly. Notice I don't say daily. Let me make another distinction, which is useful for spirituality. Sometimes in the past, spiritual writers would kind of, I think it was put there without thinking it through completely. They would always say, you need to do these things daily. You need to pray in a half an hour silence daily. You need to do these things daily. Today, spiritual writers, more and more, including myself, we use the word habitually. And that's a little different than the word daily. See, daily is kind of almost like a legalism, and there's going to be days you can't do it. Habitually, which is actually an old moral theology principle. The old moral theologians like Thomas Aquinas and so on, they made a wonderful distinction between what they called habits and random acts. See, habits and random acts works this way. Suppose you say, I'm going to exercise, and I'm going to exercise regularly. And after a month, you found out that you've actually done it 5 times. That's not a habit, that's a random act. He used to have a seminary, and he was a wonderful guy, but he was lazy. He put new dimensions to that word, Wonderful man. So he'd come in and say, well, Keith, I said, how's your prayer life going? He said, I go to Mass and stuff. He said, but if I prayed on my own, that would probably be considered a random act. But conversely, suppose you exercise, but that normally you'll hit 5 times a week, some weeks 6 times, some weeks you might make every day, but then one week you're traveling, you only hit it twice. But over the course of a year, you're going 4 or 5 times a week. See, then you have a habit of exercise. It's not a random act. See, our prayer life has to be like that. It's not that on a given day, did you say your prayers? Did you get to Mass on this day? Did you try a meditation every day? It's 11:30 at night, you stop your car. I better see my office of the church tonight because I got to do it every day. No, that's silly. You need a habit. See, so we need to do these things habitually, the way you exercise. If you're a committed exercise person, if you miss a day, nobody dies. In fact, your body hardly feels it. If you miss 10 days, your body feels it. If you're only exercising 2 or 3 times a month, you're doing random acts. You don't have a habit of exercise at all. If you're hitting 4, 5, 6 times a week, all year round, you have a deep habit of exercise. Well, it's the same with these things. You want to develop habits of doing this. So you don't have to insert the word daily. Do I do this every day? Do I meditate every day? Do I say a rosary every day? Do I go to Mass every day? Do I do this meditation every day? No. Do you have habits? It's just an habitual thing in your life. Now, 4th, prayer, either by meditation or contemplation. Very important that to come to solitude, to come to Sabbath, to come to healthy habits in our lives, there's got to be habitual prayer in our life. Okay, and by prayer, I don't just mean going to Mass and going to church. To come to solitude, there's got to be, solitude happens in the recesses of our soul. It's inner work, and we have to do inner work, and part of that has to be done by prayer. Now, very quickly, what I can do in 5 minutes, which they spend hours in courses and write books on, you're going to get this all in 5 minutes. There are two major types of private prayer, two major categories: meditation, contemplation, or meditation, discursive prayer, and centering prayer. Okay, and they actually have the same aim, but they function almost in reverse. And the aim of all prayer is to break narcissism, pragmatism, and restlessness. They're basically to break the fixation with your own consciousness, but you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it by meditation, and meditation you try to break narcissism, pragmatism, and restlessness by focusing on something beyond yourself. See, so in meditation, you take a text, you take a prayer or whatever, you take a spiritual book, you read it, and the whole idea is it's going to pull you out of yourself, and you're going to lock into this. So you're locking into some other kind of consciousness. It's taking you beyond your pragmatism, narcissism, and restlessness. And then, you know how meditative prayer works. And then when you get distracted, all of a sudden you're back in your headaches and heartaches. You pull yourself back into the book or into the prayer, and so on. It's a good way of doing it. Contemplation, or today is often called centering prayer, it does the same aim, but it works exactly the opposite. See, in meditation, you try to break your self-preoccupation by concentrating on something outside of you. In contemplation, you try to break your self-preoccupation by not concentrating on anything, including holy things. So if you've ever done centering prayer, the way centering prayer works, centering prayer doesn't work like meditation. You don't go into chapel and sit down and holy thoughts come, you hang on to them. Distractions come, you let them go. Holy thoughts come, you hang on to them. Distracting thoughts come, you let them go. It's not the way. That's meditation. Contemplation, holy thoughts come, you let them go. Distracting thoughts come, you let them go. High thoughts come, you let them go. Sexual temptations come, you let them go. Everything's treated the same. It's like sitting by a river and you're watching the boats go down. These are your thoughts, and you just make sure they all keep moving. You don't try to blank the screen out, but you refuse to concentrate on anything that's there. You let it all go by you. And through that, eventually we come to contemplativeness. We come to solitude. But even that is, you have to value that carefully. You have to adjudicate that carefully. You know, with meditative prayer, you know when you're praying and when you're not. Like on a normal day, you go to chapel and you come out and say, was that a good prayer? You say, well, it was pretty good. I concentrated most of the time. I only daydreamed half of the time. Okay. With contemplation, you can't evaluate prayer like that. You can't say, well, this was a good prayer session, this wasn't. The master, you know how you evaluate contemplative prayer? You do it for about 6 weeks. And then you have a spiritual director in your family say, you think I'm a little more calm? You think I lose my temper less? See, you only evaluate it by the fruits, by its long-range fruits. It won't, because it won't feel like prayer, but it'll start having an effect in your life. You'll start driving slower. You'll start being a little more calm. You'll lose your temper less. You'll be more comfortable at table with your family. You'll still be distracted when you're sitting in prayer itself. So that's meditation, contemplation. And those are two important exercises, one or the other or both. To come to Sabbath, to come to contemplativeness, to solitude in our lives, we need to do them. The fourth and fifth one I'm going to put together. We need to sustain these things by ritual. Only ritual can sustain your prayer and other Sabbath disciplines, and don't exhaust yourself with creativity. You know, one of the mistakes that I just see, our generation, the last generation, we almost exhausted ourselves by trying to always be creative in prayer. We're going to find a creative way of doing it to kind of heighten our consciousness and heat up the psyche a little bit. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. Prayer is sustained by ritual. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great Lutheran priest, theologian, was martyred by the Nazis when he married people. This was his marriage homily. He always used to tell these young kids, he says, today you're here and you're young and you're in love. And you think your love will sustain your marriage, but it won't. But your marriage can sustain your love. See, marriage is a container. It's a ritual container. And see, your feelings will go up and down, but the container holds you, and you can go through many years and stay married. Well, it's the same with prayer. The disciplines of prayer, they're containers. You go to prayer and don't stay there when it feels good and leave when it doesn't feel good. Just stay there. And that'll sustain you, because the deeper you go in anything, whether it's a relationship, with prayer, whatever, any kind of discipline, the longer you go and the deeper you go, the more the surface becomes unimportant. And what do I mean by that? The mystics taught me this. I'll give you an example first in life, and then I'll give you an example in prayer. Imagine you have a mother, and she is in a senior citizen's home. She's 90-something, and you're the dutiful daughter. You're living 4 miles away, and every night after work, you drive to the home and you spend an hour with your mother. Okay. Now, during the course of a year, you visit your mother almost 365 times. You miss a few days. During the course of that year, how many times do you think you'll have an interesting, exciting conversation with your mother? Maybe 3 times in a good year. And the other times, what you'll be talking about? The weather, that the kids come home, you're looking at her food and saying, Mom, how can you eat that Jell-O? It's awful, and this. And then you're talking, you're bantering, and did you watch, the Golden Girls last night? And I did, and so on. See, and you're looking at your watch a couple of times, and how soon can, and then after an hour you go home. But you do it every day. Now, you're not going to have a lot of conversations that are interesting with your mother, but do you think if you visit your mother like that day after day, year after year, that something deep, a bond is growing between you and your mother? Oh, yes. And your sister, who's conveniently living in Alaska, who sees your mother twice a year, and your mother dotes over her and says, she's so sweet, oh God. She does have 2 interesting conversations a year with your mother, but she's not very deep with your mother. She's not there all the time. See, you're there all the time. The deep stuff isn't the conversation. The deep stuff is what's happening under the surface. It's exactly the same with prayer and solitude. At a certain point, just go there. All the saints, all the mystics say, there's only one simple rule for all of this. Just go and spend the time there. Just have disciplines of prayer, of sitting. They'll do their own work. The deep thing is happening under the surface. You and your mother are growing in a deep, deep relationship, not because you're talking real deeply, but because you're together. You spend that much time together. And your sister, who sees you twice a year, who thinks she has a deep relationship with your mother, she doesn't at all. She has a much superficial relationship than yours. It's the same as the person who can go to church twice a year and have 2 highs during the whole year. They think about God twice during the year, and they're high both times, And you're going to church every day. You're not going to have a lot of highs, but you're going to grow deep, because the deeper stuff's under the surface. Tres of Lisieux once gave a wonderful answer on that. Just go to pray. Said it doesn't matter whether you're tired, whether you pay attention. Said it doesn't even matter whether you fall asleep. Somebody once asked her, said, is it wrong to fall asleep when you pray? She said, I don't think so. She said, a little child is equally pleasing to her parents, awake or asleep, maybe even more asleep, And in God's eyes, we're little children. It's just important we go there. The deep stuff is happening under the surface. So all of these things, like to come to solitude, we need habits. We need rituals. And they got to be habitual. So that we pray, we sit, we do non-pragmatic things, and don't say, well, I don't think anything's happening. I didn't feel very much what's happening today. No, do it. Writers like Thomas Keating and people like that say, just do it for some months, and then see whether, are you more calm? Are you slowing down? Is your blood pressure dropped a little bit? Are you driving slower? And you'll have some surprises, because our real contemplativeness and solitude is shown in how we drive, not exactly how we feel on day to day about God and each other. Okay. Last point, I want to do just a little bit on reconciliation, solitude and reconciliation. And I can do this more briefly, not that it isn't important, but it's very important. Sabbath, as we've said several times, is also about letting go of grudges. It's about letting go of obsessions and the statute of limitations running out. There is only one ultimate imperative in this life, and that is to forgive so that we don't die angry. Some years ago, a Swiss psychologist, Alice Miller, wrote a very famous essay, and it's called The Drama of the Gifted Child. She's a neo-Freudian, so she's not coming from a religious background at all, but it's a brilliant and a deep book. And the gifted child for Alice Miller is not Einstein's daughter or Bill Gates' daughter. He may have a high IQ. The gifted child is a sensitive person. The woman or the person who's born, and they don't want to displease people, and they're sensitive, and you're trying to be a good person, and you're not loved very well, and by the time you get to be an adult, you're carrying all kinds of wounds. And the drama of the gifted child, it hits people in their 30s and 40s, when, as Freud says, that's when, prior to 35, we don't have a lot of problems because we're pre-neurotic. You don't have any serious neurosis till you're 35, Then all these neuroses set in. All of a sudden you realize you've been had and wounded and so on. And that's why it's the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s where people start getting angry and they start getting, life wasn't fair and so on. A very simple example. I went to the seminary at 17. I was ordained at 25. And those years, seminaries were really young. And I remember my first seminary, we were almost 50 young men, and we were in a small building the size of a cracker box. And we were all like 18, 19, 20. We were highly immature. And you know something? We had a great time. It was some of the best years of my life. All this immaturity. We were all happy. It worked. We had lots of fun and so on because we were young. We were pre-neurotic. Now, we're all 50 and 60. If you put us all in a building today, we're all mature. We'd kill each other because we're all full of the neuroses of midlife and late life and so on. Then Alice Miller said, that's the drama of the gifted child. It's when you're 40, 50, and 60, and you've been this good girl who's tried to please everybody. You realize you haven't pleased anybody, least of all you, and now you're angry about it, and you got married too young, and this didn't work, and everything else. Now you have all these wounds. She said the entire spiritual and psychological task of midlife and beyond is to grieve and to forgive. Let go, let go, let go. I always tell people, when you get over 60, some of you are under 60, you're good. You have to do some other spiritual work yet. But when you get over 60, you only need 3 words left in your spiritual vocabulary. Forgive, forgive, forgive. So, that's what we have to do. So when we get to be a little older, and we get to, whenever we have to cash in our chips and pull our file card, we're not doing it with an attitude and angry and bitter and so on. That's the real spiritual task. And we can delude ourselves, and oftentimes we do, but I'm concerned about dogma, and I'm concerned about causes, and I'm concerned about this. And under 60, you get away with that. Do it. You should be out of the picket lines and hitting people and doing whatever you need to do under 60. Over 60, you can say, no, maybe the picket lines, and maybe this, and maybe pro-life, and maybe this, and maybe, or dogmatic questions and so on. But my real inner task is, I don't want to delude myself. I got to get rid of my angers. I got to give it up. Forgive, forgive, forgive. Richard Rohr puts this so well. Richard Rohr says, when you get to be 60, and men and women come a little different routes to be 60, but when you get to be 60, you're standing on the same plateau. It doesn't matter how you got there. And it doesn't matter at 60 anymore whether you came from a dysfunctional family, a happy family, how you got there, you're 60. Okay? And he says, and this, you are facing a future that has only 3 options. He said, you can end up this way. You can become a pathetic old fool. And that's an old person who hangs on. I don't want to become old. Or he said, you can become an angry old fool. That's an option many of us exercise. He said, but there's only one other option. You're either going to be a pathetic old fool, an angry old fool, or you're going to become a holy old fool. Now, notice you're going to be an old fool in any case. That's not negotiable. The only thing that's negotiable is what kind of old fool you're going to be, And the holiness at that point is not so much predicated on how much am I praying, how much am I going to church, how much have I forgiven, how mellow is my heart, how embracive am I with my heart, what have I let go of. So we get older. And those of you under 60, you may also exercise this option, to come to Sabbath, to come to solitude, to come to the wedding feast. And we're going to come there, but we may come there, as we saw this morning, mourning and weeping and grinding our teeth, We're meant to come there with a mellow heart And to do that, only one thing's going to mellow our heart. Forgive, forgive, forgive. I can't say that more strongly. I want to end this by reading to you from John the 23rd. He calls them 10 Commandments for Daily Living. A decalogue for daily living. I love this. Remember John the 23rd, all the things you heard about him aren't mythology. They're all true. He was a wonderful, practical, pathologically sane person. And this one will prove it. He had this hanging in his bedroom. Number 1, only for today I will seek to live the lifelong day positively without wishing to solve the problems of my life all at once. Number 2, only for today I will take great care with my appearance. I will dress modestly. I will not raise my voice. I will be courteous in my behavior. I will not criticize anyone. And I will not claim to improve or discipline anyone except myself. Number 3, only for today I will be happy in the certainty that I was created to be happy, not only in this world, but also in the next. Number 4, only for today I will adapt to circumstances without requiring that all circumstances be adapted to my wishes. 5, only for today I will devote 10 minutes of time to good reading, and I will remember that just as food is necessary for the life of the body, good reading is necessary for the life of the soul. Number 6, only for today I will do one good deed and not tell anyone about it. Number 7, only for today I will do at least one thing I do not like, and if my feelings are hurt, I will make sure that nobody notices. Number 8, only for today I will make a plan for myself. I might not follow it, but I will make it. And I will be on guard against 2 evils, hastiness and indecision. Number 9, only for today I will believe firmly, despite appearances, that the good providence of God cares for me the way nothing else cares for me. And 10, only for today I will have no fears. In particularly, I will not be afraid to enjoy what is beautiful and to believe in the goodness of life. Indeed, for 12 hours I can certainly do this, that which might cause me consternation were I to believe I had to do it my whole life.